2 nights before Christmas, I stood on my parents' front porch holding a plate of gingerbread meant for a party my own son wasn't allowed to walk into. "No kids this year," my mother had told me over the phone. "None, it just keeps things simple." I believed her because I had spent 2 years believing her. Then I looked through the front window and saw my sister's 3 children sprawled under the tree in matching pajamas, tinsel caught in their hair, a bowl of cookies half gone between them. My mother opened the door, planted herself in the frame like a wall with a cardigan on, and said the sentence I will never stop hearing. "These children deserve to be here." What none of them knew yet was that 3 weeks earlier, tucked behind a stack of coupons in my mother's junk drawer, I had found a single folded piece of paper. And what I did with that paper at their Christmas party ended $18,000 of lies, and their grip on my family, in under 4 minutes. Welcome to Quiet Reckonings, the channel for women who kept the peace long enough to finally stop. We tell true stories about family, money, and the exact moment a quiet person decides she's done being quiet. If this story lands at the right time for you, drop a comment and subscribe, because you're going to want to be here for how it ends. I live in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where the pharmacist knows your kid's name and means it when he asks how he's doing. 2 stoplights, 1 hospital. I've worked there 11 years as a pediatric nurse, mostly overnight, the one they page when a toddler needs an IV and nobody else can find the vein. My hands don't shake. That's not a boast, it's a trained skill. Panic is a luxury nobody pays a nurse to have. The charge nurses call me the calm one, and I've learned something true about myself over the years. The calmer I get, the worse the news usually is. Hold on to that. At home, I'm just Caleb's mom. He's 6, missing a front tooth, obsessed with dinosaurs, and he believes, thanks to his grandfather, that wood glue fixes almost anything. Saturdays mean pancakes, no exceptions. Our house is small, 3 bedrooms, blue shutters, paid off free and clear. I built this life slowly and on my own terms, nursing school on scholarship, 2 jobs at once, a car that started on the 3rd try if you talked nice to it. Nobody handed me a piece of it, and I liked it that way. When you build something with your own hands, you know exactly what it cost you. What I didn't understand that winter was that someone else had been quietly doing math on my life too. Someone who looked at everything I'd built and decided a slice of it belonged to them. They just never planned on asking out loud. My husband was a lineman for the local power co-op, the guy who climbs poles in freezing sleet so everyone else's lights stay on. In the summer of 2023, driving home from a storm repair job, a truck crossed the center line into his lane. He was 33. Caleb was 4. I was 31. That's the day I learned grief doesn't knock, it just moves in. The insurance payout came to $150,000. I paid off the house and put the rest into a college fund for our son. His work boots are still by the back door. I never moved them, and to their credit, his parents never once suggested I should. His parents, call them Hal and Ruth, didn't drift away the way people warn you in-laws will after a funeral. Every Sunday there's a chair for me and a booster seat for Caleb, no invitation required. Ruth taught him to roll pie dough. Hal taught him to build a birdhouse and let him hammer every nail in crooked, calling it character. They have an old orchard 8 minutes from mine that my son considers the center of the universe. I'm telling you about them now because it matters later. I didn't grow up believing family was a performance. I married into proof it doesn't have to be. Not everyone, though, looked at that insurance settlement and saw a grieving widow trying to keep her son's world steady. Somewhere across town, someone looked at it the way you'd look at a door somebody forgot to lock. 7 months after the funeral, in January of 2024, my mother called and asked me to come over alone. My mother doesn't request things, she stages them. I drove the 12 minutes over with a knot already forming in my stomach. In the kitchen, under the fluorescent light, she slid a letter across the table. Big red letters at the top, past due. My father sat at the far end, staring out at the frozen backyard like it had personally wronged him. To understand that stare, you'd need to know that 3 years earlier, the plastics plant where he'd worked for 34 years shut its doors for good. 59 years old, standing in a job fair line next to kids barely out of high school. Nobody called him back. His pension came in smaller than he'd been promised, and these days he stocks shelves part-time at my brother-in-law's HVAC warehouse. My mother folded her hands like she was in a pew. 10 more days and the bank starts foreclosure paperwork, she said. Then, dropping her voice like the neighbors might hear through the walls, Your father would rather die than let the ladies from church see a foreclosure notice staked in this yard. The Church Ladies Committee is my mother's entire kingdom. She chairs hospitality. Losing that house wouldn't just mean losing a house, it would mean losing face in front of the only jury she has ever cared about impressing. I looked at my father's hands, cracked and worn from 34 winters of shift work. I looked at those red letters, and I did what nurses are trained to do in an emergency. I moved toward it. I pulled out my phone right there at the table and said, "Let me just call the credit union myself in the morning and pay them directly, straight onto the loan." My mother had her answer ready before I even finished the sentence. The auto pay was tied to my father's account, she said. Switching who paid meant a trip to the branch, new forms, both their signatures, and there wasn't time. 10 days, maybe less. Then she delivered the line she knew would finish the job. Your father will not stand at that counter and let his daughter pay off his debt in front of the whole town. Athena, that man has lost his job and half his pension. Let him keep something. I asked to see a statement. I want that on the record, I did ask. She disappeared into the bedroom and came back with an actual document, the credit union's letterhead, the red stamp, the account number, all of it real. It was folded in half, her thumb pinning the crease while I skimmed the balance line. The date in the corner sat tucked just under that fold. I did almost everything right that night. Except one thing, I let a folded corner stay folded. That evening, I set up a standing transfer, $650, first of every month, and I sent January's payment immediately so the 10-day clock would stop ticking. My mother cried at her kitchen table and called me her good girl, her responsible one. My father never turned around from the window. I told myself it was shame about the debt. It was shame, I just had the wrong diagnosis. That transfer started as quiet as a heartbeat. It wouldn't stop for another 23 months. Monthly transfer becomes furniture fast. You stop noticing it's even there. What I should have been watching instead was everything else stacking up on top of it. That July, my mother needed emergency gum surgery, $1,200. Insurance supposedly wouldn't cover it. She called me from the dental office parking lot, her voice thin as tissue paper. I sent it. The following March, the furnace died, $900, and I could hear a repairman coughing somewhere behind her on the call. I sent that too. Every single emergency had a deadline, a prop, and a performance, and every one of them landed on a night I was too exhausted from a shift to ask a single follow-up question. Here's what else was happening those same months, and I want you to hold both pictures side by side the way I eventually had to. My sister posted a photo of a brand new minivan parked in her driveway, captioned "Blessed." My 10-year-old niece, who practically lives in a cheer uniform, flew out with her whole family, matching t-shirts, and all to a national competition 3 hours away. My sister's husband owns the very HVAC company where my father stocks shelves, and everyone in town knew that business had been struggling since 2022. And yet somehow their life kept getting shinier while my parents' furnace kept mysteriously dying. I wasn't blind to it. I told myself the business must have turned around. The van was financed. Cheer came with scholarships. Nurses are trained to chart everything down to the decimal. Daughters, apparently, are trained to forget. So those two pictures sat side by side in my head for months, and I kept failing to connect the wire between them, because that wire ran straight through my mother's kitchen, and some part of me wasn't ready to follow it that far. While my bank account was quietly being farmed, something even quieter was happening to my son, and I want to be clear that I didn't just let it slide. At Thanksgiving that first year, my mother set formal places for the grandchildren at the big table, cloth napkins, the good glasses, name cards even. Caleb's plate sat alone on a card table out in the garage, next to the recycling bins. For space, she said. I didn't make a scene. I picked up both our plates and carried them out to the garage, and we ate together out there in our coats, laughing about how our breath made little clouds in the cold air. On the way out that night, I said exactly one thing, level as a carpenter's bubble level. If the garage is good enough for my son, it's good enough for me. After that, I cut our visits down to once a mo. Nth, I don't fight about who gets which chair, I just choose where I sit. Then came my son's 6th birthday. A card arrived signed Grandma and Grandpa, a $5 bill folded inside. That same week, my niece was flown out for a full grandparents' weekend at the cheer competition, a hotel room, a brand new warm-up jacket showing up in every photo. I called my mother and calmly asked why one grandchild got a whole weekend and the other got a $5 bill. She sighed like I was the unreasonable one. Madison's activities cost real money, Athena. Caleb 6. He doesn't even know the difference. My son knew the difference. 6-year-olds always know. They just don't have the vocabulary for it yet, so they hand the hurt to their mothers to carry instead. I hung up, polite as always, thinking that was as bad as things could possibly get in this family. It wasn't even the opening act. Let me show you what $650 a month actually cost, because the money itself was the smallest part of the bill. It was 2 extra 12-hour shifts a month, which meant 2 more mornings of my son eating cereal at his grandmother's counter while I slept with earplugs in after a night shift. It was swim lessons pushed back a whole season. It was tires I nursed along into November, praying the first snow would hold off. I had a budget sheet taped inside my kitchen cupboard, and the very first line on it, before groceries, before anything with my son's name on it, was my parents. I looked at that sheet every single morning while the coffee brewed, and felt something I couldn't quite name yet, a tight knot sitting right under my ribs. I called it guilt. Nurses are experts at renaming pain until the shift is finally over. Then came the first week of November. My mother's voice on the phone was warm as syrup. The family's Christmas Eve party would be at their house this year, church ladies invited, the pastor's wife, everyone who mattered to her. Could I help with the food? $300 just this once, times being what they were. I said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. Of course I did. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added the new house rule. Oh, and sweetheart, we're keeping it adults only this year. No kids at all. It's just simpler for everyone. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone long after she'd hung up, staring at a crayon drawing of a T-Rex wearing a Santa hat taped to my fridge. I had just agreed to buy the food for a party my own 6-year-old was banned from attending. And the guest list, as it turned out, still had one more twist stitched into it that I hadn't seen coming yet. Here's the part that still catches in my chest. Before I even figured out how to explain the party to Caleb, he showed me something he'd been building in his grandfather's workshop for 3 evenings straight. A small wooden star. A little lopsided, sanded soft, painted gold with more enthusiasm than precision. On the back, in wobbly letters he'd burned in himself while his grandfather hovered like a nervous surgeon, it read, "Grandma L, it's an ornament," he told me, gap-toothed and glowing with pride. "For Grandma's tree. Can I give it to her at the party?" I called my mother back that night and kept my tone light. I asked for 15 minutes, just 15, at the very start of the evening, so a 6-year-old could hand his grandmother a wooden star and then leave before the adults sat down to dinner. She didn't even pretend to consider it. "Rules are rules, Athena. Don't make this difficult." Then, softer, in the voice you use to talk someone off a ledge you personally pushed them onto, "Christmas is for the grown-ups this year, honey. He won't even remember it by Easter. He won't even remember it." I looked across my living room at my son, the same boy who still remembered exactly which seat he'd been assigned in the garage a year earlier, who still noticed whose shoes came from Grandma and whose didn't, because children are built out of memory and hope in almost equal parts. I told him Grandma's party would be boring, just taxes and coffee talk, and that we'd find his star a better home. He took it the way kids take these things, quietly, and went back to his dinosaurs. That little star sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, its crooked gold arms pointed at me like a question I still hadn't answered. That following Sunday at my in-laws' place, I watched what the other version of family looks like. Flour dusted across the counter, Caleb standing on a chair cutting biscuits with the rim of a water glass, Hal sketching out plans for a birdhouse edition like it was illegal filing, Ruth already plotting out Christmas morning at the orchard, Coco on the porch, paper crowns, Hal threatening to climb up on the roof with a string of sleigh bells, which at 67 would have been a genuine medical event. Ruth handed me a dish towel and asked, in that mild tone of hers that somehow "This is nothing, so they asked you for party money, for a party the little one can't even go to." I started making excuses for them. Times were tight, my father's pension, the furnace, the church ladies coming. Ruth just dried her hands and looked at me the way she looks at a pie that won't set. "Honey," she said, "you don't owe anybody a bridge that only ever carries traffic one direction." She didn't push it further than that. That's Ruth, she plants one sentence and lets the weather do the rest of the work. Driving home that night, 8 minutes of dark road strung with Christmas lights, I felt that knot under my ribs turn over for the first time. Someone outside my own head had finally said the quiet part out loud. The money only ever flowed one way. The love only ever flowed one way. And the rules only ever landed on one child in this family, mine. I gripped the wheel and did what I always do with pain that doesn't have a chart yet. I filed it away. Christmas was 3 weeks out. I told myself I'd get through the holidays first, keep the peace one more season. The junk drawer had other plans. If you've ever handed your family money and told yourself the knot in your stomach was just guilt, stay with me. I ignored mine for 2 full years, and it cost me $18,000 to finally understand what it had been trying to tell me. If you're new here, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, has your family ever made you feel like a bank with a heartbeat? That Thanksgiving, one of our once-a-month visits, I almost didn't go. The house smelled like sage and scorekeeping. My sister arrived with her kids in coordinated plaid, her husband loudly discussing his latest truck payment at a volume clearly meant for an audience. My niece bounced through the living room in brand-new cheer shoes, white, glitter trim, the kind that cost more than my electric bill, did a toe touch in the hallway that nearly took out the china cabinet, and everyone laughed. The afternoon rolled on the way those afternoons always did, my mother conducting the whole room like an orchestra, my son quietly parked in a corner with his dinosaurs, watchful, small. It was the drive home that split things open. Caleb sat in his booster seat watching the streetlights slide by, and he said it the way kids say enormous things, no wind-up at all. Madison said Grandma bought her cheer shoes. A pause, then the part that cracked straight through me. Grandma never buys me shoes. I looked at my own eyes in the rearview mirror and watched them change, because I was finally doing the math I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Cheer shoes, a competition trip, a minivan captioned blessed, a furnace that died the same spring. Kids don't know which sentences are made of glass, they just hand them straight to you. And I remembered something else from that afternoon, something I'd filed and forgotten in half a second. While my niece spun in those shoes announcing Grandma bought them, my mother's face hadn't lit up with pride. It had gone completely still, the face of someone doing damage assessment. I drove the rest of the way home under the speed limit, both hands on the wheel. I didn't let it sit. The next evening I called my mother, kept my voice as light as a grocery list, and asked, "Did you buy Madison's cheer shoes?" She laughed, already prepared, which should have told me everything, because prepared people sound exactly like innocent people on the phone. There was a consignment sale at the church, honey, $12. That child tells everyone Grandma bought it because it makes her feel special. You know how she is. And here's the thing, there really had been a consignment sale at the church that fall. I'd seen the flyer myself, taped to the choir room door. The lie had scaffolding. Good lies always do. I said something pleasant and hung up, standing in my kitchen wanting so badly to believe her that my teeth ached. Believing her was cheaper. Believing her meant my family was simply thoughtless, survivable instead of something organized, which was a different problem altogether. But I've been a nurse too long. When a chart doesn't add up, you don't argue with it and you don't cry about it. You flag it and you keep watching the patient. So that's exactly what I did with my own mother. I flagged her. By the first week of December, my mother called again. The propane tank was low, prices were up, could I send $200? This time I tried something different. Instead of sending money, I went shopping. I filled 4 grocery bags with staples, soup, coffee, flour, the good peanut butter, and at the hardware store I bought a prepaid propane card, the kind you hand directly to the delivery driver. Then I drove the 12 minutes over and carried it all into her kitchen myself. I want you to watch her face the way I watched it, because for 1 full second, the mask arrived late. When she saw groceries instead of an envelope. Before the smile could load, her expression showed pure, undecorated disappointment, the look you give a vending machine that returns the wrong change. Then the smile clicked into place, a beat too slow. "You're so thoughtful, sweetheart," she said, "but next time just send the money, it's easier, I know what we need." I stacked cans into her pantry with my back turned so she couldn't watch my own face doing its math. Groceries feed a house. They just don't feed whatever my money had actually been feeding. A propane card can't sit courtside at a cheer competition. Soup can't cover a minivan payment. I didn't say a word of that out loud. I mentioned the coffee was running low, and that Caleb had drawn her a dinosaur, and she thanked me the way you'd thank a radio for playing. 2 years of emergencies, and the one time I brought the literal things a struggling household actually needs, I'd somehow still gotten it wrong. I dried my hands on her Christmas towel and asked where she kept the scissors. The propane card had come zip-tied to a cardboard backer, and her kitchen scissors live exactly where every mother's scissors live, the junk drawer by the wall phone, third one down, the one that's held the same population of dead batteries, rubber bands, coupons, and pens with no ink since roughly the Reagan administration. My mother wasn't even in the room. My sister had called about party trays, and she'd taken it in the hallway with the door half shut, the way surgeons step out for a page. So I was alone in the kitchen I grew up in, digging through a junk drawer for a pair of scissors, and underneath a coupon envelope I found something else. A window envelope from the credit union, addressed to my parents, already slit open. I know that logo the way I know my own name badge. It's the logo I'd been mailing $650 toward every single month for almost 2 years. I can't honestly tell you I meant to do anything more than nudge it aside. That's the truth. My fingers found the scissors, but the envelope had shifted, and the page inside had slid halfway out, and printed across the top of that page, in the plain, confident type banks use when they aren't worried about anything at all, were words that had no business sitting in the same house as past due. I went very still. Down the hall, my mother laughed at something my sister said. I set the scissors on the counter and unfolded that page right there next to the coupons, and the kitchen went completely, absolutely quiet. It was a payoff letter, the kind a bank sends exactly once in the life of a loan, addressed to my parents, dated 9 years earlier. They'd kept it the way other people keep a diploma, one paragraph. It confirmed the mortgage on their home had been paid in full as of October of that year. I read it 3 times, the way I double-check a medication dose, hoping the second and third reads would somehow correct the first. 9 years. 9 years before my mother had slid a past-due letter across the same table with her hands trembling right on cue. Unless they'd taken out a new loan against the house since then, there had been nothing left here to foreclose on since before my son was even born, since before my husband and I had so much as talked about having children. That was the one door still open, and I decided, standing right there next to the coupons, that I would close it myself. I want to be honest about what I did next, because people always picture themselves screaming in that kitchen, and I understand the appeal. I didn't scream. 11 years of overnight shifts build something into you that takes over automatically when the news is at its worst, a stillness that shows up like a second nurse walking into the room. I memorized the account number. I memorized the date. I folded the page back along its original crease exactly as I'd found it, slid the envelope back under the coupons at the same angle, and closed the drawer. I cut the propane card free, left it on the counter with the scissors squared neatly on top, carried in the last grocery bag, kissed my mother's cheek while she was still on the phone with my sister, and drove the 12 minutes home with the radio off. Unless that last locked door held a surprise, I had spent 9 years' worth of money saving a house that was never actually drowning, because someone had figured out that a grieving nurse pays her family's bills without ever asking to see the wound. That night, after Caleb was asleep with one arm wrapped around a stuffed triceratops, I sat at my kitchen table and finally did what I should have done 2 years earlier. I charted it. I logged into my own bank account and printed every single transfer to my parents going back to January of that first year. They came off the printer in neat gray rows, patient as evidence. 24 monthly transfers of $650. $15,600 just from those. Then the SPE. SILE requests, gum surgery, $1,200, the furnace, $900, this year's Christmas party food, $300. I wrote it all out on a sheet of my son's graph paper, 1 line per wound, and totaled it at the bottom the way I total intake and output at the end of a shift. $18,000 even. Then I opened social media, because my sister has never once locked her life down, she displays it, and I matched dates. The same week the furnace supposedly died, my sister's family was at a national cheer competition 3 hours away, 4 tickets, 2 hotel rooms, matching shirts. The same week of the emergency dental surgery, the new minivan showed up in their driveway with its blessed caption. I sat back and looked at the 2 columns lined up side by side, my emergencies, her milestones, arranged like a heart monitor next to a receipt. Every single crisis in my mother's house lined up neatly with a celebration in my sister's. I didn't need a private investigator. I needed a printer and 1 quiet hour. And underneath all that cold arithmetic, one warm, awful thought kept surfacing, the one that finally made it actually hurt. My father had signed for that house. My father had known. My father had watched me pay for nothing, month after month, and said nothing. Here's something most people don't know, and it's the reason this story ends with paperwork instead of a shouting match. When a mortgage gets paid off, the lender files a satisfaction with the county recorder's office. It's a public record. Anyone can walk in and ask for a copy, no lawyer, no drama, just a few dollars and a signature. So on my lunch break the next day, still in my scrub top, I walked into the county recorder's office and gave the clerk my parents' names. It took her about 4 minutes. Satisfaction of mortgage, recorded that October, 9 years back. Then she ran the index forward for me from that date to the present. No new mortgage, no home equity loan, no liens of any kind. That last door closed with a click only I could hear. She stamped my copy, certified, with the raised county seal you can actually feel under your thumb like Braille. The county doesn't lie for anybody. That's the nicest thing about paperwork. On my way back to work, I stopped at the credit union too, and I want to be fair here because the teller did absolutely nothing wrong. I didn't ask a single question about my parents' actual accounts. She'd have refused if I had. I asked general ones instead. Did late notices ever go out to anyone besides the account holder? No, never. When had the past due letter format last changed? She pulled up a sample of the current version, redesigned years earlier, new logo, blue banner across the top. The letter my mother had slid across her kitchen table that January had the old red stamp, the format from years before that. It was a real letter. It was just a fossil pulled out of a drawer and reused like a stage prop. Now I knew what had happened, and roughly how much, and for how long. What I still didn't know was how my father had managed to sit through every single act of it without saying a word. I worked a night shift with all of it sitting on my chest like a swallowed stone. Somewhere around 3 a.m, restocking a supply cart in an empty hallway, it finally landed on me what this feeling actually was. I've sat across from parents in the family consultation room and handed them the worst sentence of their lives, and I've watched the exact moment they stop hearing the machines beeping and start hearing their entirely new world instead. That was me now. I'd just been handed a diagnosis about my own family, and the disease had been quietly progressing for 2 years. With no symptoms, I'd let myself read. When I got home that morning, I didn't sleep. I pulled down the box where I still keep my husband's papers, looking for my own copy of the insurance paperwork, wanting the numbers straight before I did anything else. Tucked between the folders, I found a card he'd bought for our son's first birthday, meant to be given to him when he was older. His handwriting was terrible, all electricians' hands, and I traced the words twice to be sure I was reading them right. Be the kind of man who tells the truth even when his voice shakes. I sat on my bedroom floor with that card for a long time. Then I made 2 decisions in the order that mattered. First, no ambush, no public post, no screaming phone call, because performance is my mother's trade, not mine. Second, someone in that house was going to get one clean chance to be the man on that card. I decided to give my father that chance myself. Before I did anything else, I drove the 8 minutes out to the orchard, because if I've learned one thing, it's that you don't walk into surgery without a consult first. Ruth poured 2 mugs of strong coffee, and I laid it all out on her kitchen table, the certified copy with its raised seal, the graph paper ledger totaling $18,000, the dates lined up against my sister's celebrations like a dance card. Ruth read every page twice without saying a word, and Ruth's silence is the only silence I know that feels like being held. Through her window, I could see Hal and Caleb out on the porch fixing a hinge on the birdhouse, my son holding the screwdriver with his tongue poking out sideways, exactly the way his father used to. Finally, Ruth set the ledger down and asked, "What do you want, Athena? Not what do they deserve, what do you want?" I told her the truth. I wanted it to stop. I wanted my son to never again be the only child eating in a garage, and I did not want to become the woman screaming in a driveway because that woman loses even when she's right. Ruth nodded slowly. "Truth told calm is still truth," she said, "but you tell it standing up, not kneeling." We built the plan right there over our coffee. Step 1, my father gets asked directly, privately, one honest chance with a door he can walk through with his dignity intact. Step 2, if the lying continued, especially in public, then the truth would get told in public too, exactly once, with the paperwork doing the talking instead of me. Ruth walked me out to my car and squeezed my hand on the porch step. "You're not burning a bridge, honey," she said. "You're just done paying the toll on it." I found my father a few days later exactly where I knew he'd be, alone on the loading dock of my brother-in-law's warehouse, eating a sandwich out of the same dented lunchbox he's carried since before I was born. When the plastics plant closed, that lunchbox was the one thing he walked out with. I sat down next to him on an overturned crate and didn't dress anything up. The mortgage was paid off years ago, Dad. I've seen the county record, the release. I've been sending money to stop a foreclosure that hasn't existed in almost a decade. His hands went still on the lunchbox lid, and then they started to shake. My father does not have hands that shake. These are hands that rewired our basement in a single weekend. He didn't deny it. I'll give him that much, and I've turned it over in my mind plenty of nights since. He looked out at the parking lot and said, "Your mother handles the envelopes, honey. A man's got to keep something for himself." Then, quieter, like a confession that had been waiting years to find a priest. It was only supposed to go on for a few months. I asked him the only question I'd actually come to ask. "Will you tell the truth at Christmas? In front of everyone, I'll stand right next to you while you do it." I watched my father, the same man who used to carry me on his shoulders at the county fair, stare down at a concrete floor and choose. "Don't make me choose, Athena," he said. "Your mother, your sister, this job." He gestured with his chin at the warehouse behind him, his own son-in-law's warehouse, the only place still willing to hand a 63-year-old man a paycheck and a reason to get out of bed. I stood, kissed the top of his head, and left him with his sandwich. Before I tell you what I did with that county-stamped copy, let me just say this. If a nurse in Ohio can sit across from her own father on a loading dock and keep her voice level, you can survive the conversation you've been avoiding too. Subscribe if you're staying for the party, because everything up to now was just the table setting. My father went home and told my mother that night. I know because the phone tree lit up before the weekend was over, and it was not an apology tour, it was a controlled burn. She didn't call me. She called around me. She called her sister-in-law, my aunt, and at least 2 church ladies, and the story she planted was smooth as a funeral lily. Poor Athena, she hasn't been right since her husband passed. She's gotten strange about money, counting out loud every dollar she's ever given us. Now she's imagining some conspiracy about the house. Pray for her. It's a classic move, and I want you to recognize it the way I finally had to. When a liar knows the truth is coming, they don't argue with the evidence. They discredit the witness in advance, so that when you finally speak, the room hears grief instead of facts. There was exactly one crack in that plan, and it had a name. My aunt is my father's younger sister, sharp as a tack and allergic to perfume of every kind, including the verbal kind. She'd watched that plant close with her own eyes. She knew exactly whose paycheck signed her brother's timesheet, and she'd wondered aloud more than once at holidays how my parents were suddenly managing so comfortably. So instead of praying for me, she called me directly. "Your mother's telling everyone you've gone strange about money," she said. No hello at all because she doesn't waste words. "What's actually going on, child?" I looked at the yellow folder already squared on my counter and kept my answer short, because some invitations work better than explanations ever could. "Come to the Christmas party, watch who goes strange." 2 days later my sister called, opening the way she always opens negotiations, sugar first. "Hey, Mom says you're coming Christmas Eve, it's going to be so nice." Then the pivot, bright as a knife hidden under a dish towel. "It's adults only though, so don't make it weird about your kid, okay? He'll live." I said nothing, which with my sister is like leaving a door open in a windstorm. She kept going, her voice dropping out of the sugar register into something older, something I recognized from childhood fights over the last slice of anything. "And Athena, whatever little spreadsheet you think you're building over there, stop it. Stop counting other people's blessings. Some of us actually work for what we have. Some of us didn't get a widow's jackpot." A widow's jackpot. My husband came home from a storm repair job in a closed casket, and to my sister, the insurance money that paid off his son's bedroom was somehow a lottery win, an unfairness done specifically to her. People show you their arithmetic eventually. In my sister's ledger, everything I had was luck, and everything she had was earned, and the $18,000 that flowed from my night shifts through my mother's kitchen into her minivan payment was simply the universe correcting one of its mistakes. I didn't bother explaining the actual numbers to her. You don't argue with a ledger written in crayon. "See you at the party, Britt," I said, gentle as a nurse taking someone's blood pressure, and hung up while she was still mid-sentence. I've since decided I can live with being rude about that. She thought my silence meant she'd won. I let her believe it. Wrapping paper stays on until the morning. That's the whole point of wrapping paper. Let me show you exactly what I brought to that party, because it fit inside a purse and weighed less than a paperback novel. One yellow folder, the same kind we use for patient charts at the hospital, because you use the tools your hands already trust. Inside it, page 1, the certified copy of the mortgage satisfaction, raised seal and all. Page 2, my graph paper ledger, 24 transfers plus 3 emergencies, $18,000 exactly, each line dated. Page 3, a simple 2-column list, her emergencies on the left, my sister's celebrations on the right. No commentary needed because the dates spoke for themselves. That same week I stopped by my bank and asked one question. If I cancel a standing transfer through the app, when does it actually take effect? Immediately the teller told me just 4 taps. I thanked him and left the transfer running for now. I want you to understand why, because this is the part I'd underline if this were a real chart. I wasn't building an ambush. I was building a choice. I made myself one quiet rule at my kitchen table and didn't need to write it down to remember it. If they told the truth at that party, or even just stayed quiet, the whole conversation would happen privately in January, family only, door closed. But if they stood in that living room, in front of the church ladies and the pastor's wife, and told the lie one more time with my own food sitting on their table, then the truth would get spoken exactly where the lie had lived, in public. Once. Calmly. I've delivered worse news than this with steadier hands. 2 days before Christmas, late afternoon, I drove over to drop off what I'd promised, a tray of gingerbread and a good cheese board, because whatever else was true, I'd given my word and I keep it, even to people who don't. Caleb was at the orchard helping Ruth butter cookie sheets, so I was alone when I pulled up and saw the glow lighting up the front window. And then I saw what exactly that glow was lighting. My sister's 3 kids, in matching red plaid pajamas, draping tinsel over the tree while a holiday movie played, wrapping paper and ribbons scattered across the rug, my sister filming them on her phone with one hand and eating popcorn with the other. 2 full days before the supposedly adults-only party, in the same house where my 6-year-old couldn't get 15 minutes to hand his grandmother a wooden star. I rang the doorbell. My mother opened it and did not invite me in. She filled the doorway with her body, one hand braced on the frame, the sound of her actual grandchildren laughing at her actual tree rising up behind her. I kept my voice level. No kids this year, Mom. And my mother, my church hospitality committee mother, looked me dead in the eye and delivered it without a single flicker. These children deserve to be here. My sister appeared over her shoulder, smiling like oil sitting on top of water. I looked at the 2 of them framed in the doorway of the house I'd spent 2 years rescuing, handed my mother the gingerbread, said I'd see her tomorrow night, and walked back to my car with steady hands. I docked her. Ove home and ironed my good green dress. That evening, Caleb asked one more time if he could come to Grandma's party, asking carefully, the way kids ask when they already suspect the answer, the wooden star held in both hands like a ticket. I got down on my knees so we were eye to eye, because the big sentences should never come down from above. You're going to spend Christmas somewhere people are happy to see you, I told him. That's the only kind we do from now on. He thought about it with his whole face, then asked if the orchard even had a chimney, and just like that we were fine, because 6-year-olds always check the important things first. He spent that night at the orchard, flower on his sleeves by sundown, and I have never in my life been so glad to have my son 8 minutes away and a whole world apart from where I was headed. Back home, I ironed the green dress, the one my husband used to call my courtroom dress, because I only ever wore it when life required a signature. I set the yellow folder next to my keys, painted my nails, and studied the steady brush the way I steady a syringe. On my way to bed, I stopped at the shelf where his photo sits, that grin he always wore at the top of a pole, and told him the plan out loud, because some conversations don't care much about physics. You'd hate this party, I told him. You'd love what I'm bringing to it. Then I slept 8 full hours, the guilty toss and turn all night, the finished sleep just fine. Christmas Eve, 7 o'clock. My parents' house looked like the cover of a magazine that stopped existing years ago. Electric candles glowing in every window, the tree dressed all the way to its collar in gold, a buffet table running the full length of the dining room wall. I'll note for the record that the ham anchoring the center of that table was the ham my $300 had bought, sitting there under a sprig of rosemary like it had always belonged. 20-some guests moved through the downstairs with cups of punch. 4 women from the church committee, silver-haired and sharp-eyed as auditors. The pastor's wife, who radiates a kind of quiet that makes people confess things at potlucks without meaning to. My aunt posted up by the bookcase, watching the room the way I watch a monitor. My brother-in-law loud by the fireplace, retelling a story about a supplier he'd apparently outsmarted, somehow both the victim and the genius of his own tale. And on the staircase, in their church clothes, sat my sister's 3 kids, the adults-only rule having quietly died at the door it was invented to guard. One of them waved at me. I waved back, because none of this was ever about the children. My mother crossed the room, took my arm and presented me to the church ladies like an exhibit. You all know my youngest, the nurse. She's just so busy we hardly ever see her. Honey with a pin buried inside it. I smiled, said the punch was lovely, and let her steer me past. The yellow folder sat in my purse against my hip, patient as a stethoscope. Every lie in that room wore velvet that night. I was the only thing in it without a costume on. It came when it came, holding a cup of punch and wearing a smile. Around 8, my sister tapped a spoon against her glass and called for a toast, and the room obliged, and she raised her cider toward our mother with tears arranged neatly in the corners of her eyes. To Mom, who holds this whole family together with her own 2 hands. Glasses lifted, a cheer went up, and then one of the church ladies, decades of potlucks behind her and 0 unspoken thoughts, said the sentence that lit the fuse without knowing it was one. Lorraine, honestly, I don't know how you 2 manage it on a pension with everything so expensive these days. You keep this house so beautifully. The room hummed its agreement, and my mother, warm on cider and candlelight and 20 guests' worth of admiration, straightened her spine, pressed a hand flat to her chest and said it. We manage because we don't owe anybody a single thing. We've never taken a dime from anyone in our lives. Everything in this house, Frank and I earned ourselves. The mantel clock ticked twice. I felt the whole room the way you feel a pulse under your fingers, that full hand knowing. My father was staring at the carpet like it was open water. My aunt was staring at me, and I heard my own heartbeat do the thing it does during a code, when everyone else's panic climbs toward the ceiling and mine drops straight through the floor, slow, wide, and perfectly clear. There's a moment in an emergency room right before you make the call when the noise just stops, and the whole room turns and waits on you. That living room did exactly that, though nobody in it knew it yet. I set my punch cup down on the bookcase next to my aunt, who took it from my hand without being asked, the way a nurse takes an instrument. Mom, I said, my voice landing at the volume I use for reading out Medi. Cadian instructions, low enough that everyone in the room had to lean in to catch it. Tell them about the year the mortgage was paid off. You could have heard a furnace kick on, the one I'd apparently bought. My mother's smile stayed pinned up, but it stopped reaching anywhere behind her eyes. Athena, honey, she said, this is a party. I agreed with her completely. It was a party. And then I did exactly what I'd promised myself at my own kitchen table. No speech, no trembling finale, just the facts in the order they happened, delivered the way I deliver lab results, because facts don't need my help carrying their own weight. 2 years ago you showed me a past due notice and told me the bank would start foreclosure in 10 days. Since then I've sent $650 on the 1st of every month for 24 months. I paid $1,200 for dental surgery, $900 for a furnace, $300 for tonight. I nodded toward the buffet. That ham is mine. $18,000 total. Nobody moved. My brother-in-law's mouth hung open mid-sentence, frozen. I reached into my purse, pulled out the folder, and laid the first page flat on the white tablecloth, angled so the whole room could see it, the raised seal catching the lamplight the way embossed things always do. This is a certified copy from the county recorder's office. Anyone can request one, it's public record. My mother's hand shot out for it, and I let her take it because you can crumple a piece of paper, but you can't crumple a fact. Satisfaction of mortgage, I said to the room gently the way you'd read a tag off a wrapped gift. Paid in full 9 years ago. The clock kept ticking. Somewhere on the staircase, a small shoe scuffed against a step. 9 years before you cried at your own kitchen table about losing this house. There was never a foreclosure. There was never even a loan left to pay off. One of the church ladies set her plate down without a sound. The pastor's wife lowered her cup onto its saucer, and the porcelain rang once, small and bright, like a bell in a courtroom. My aunt stepped forward, lifted the certified copy off the tablecloth, read it top to bottom through her reading glasses, and looked at my mother with 60 years of shared history draining right out of her face. "Lorraine," she said quietly, "this is the county seal." Nobody in that room argued with a county seal. My voice, through all of it, stayed quieter than a dishwasher running in the next room. My sister broke first. She always breaks first, and I'd spent years mistaking that for confidence. She came up off the couch, cider sloshing, her voice climbing straight into the smoke alarm register, and in front of the pastor's wife, the church committee, and her own children on the staircase, she screamed out a confession nobody had even asked her for yet. "It's family money, it stayed in the family." I let it finish landing before I answered, level as a bubble in a level. "So was mine." Then came my mother, and I watched her cycle through her entire repertoire in about 30 seconds, because a cornered performer just runs through every song she knows. First, the paperwork must be wrong, banks make mistakes constantly. Then, I was being cruel, doing arithmetic against my own mother at Christmas in front of guests. Then the mask came off entirely, and her voice dropped into a hiss I had genuinely never heard from her before. "Ungrateful. 18 years I raised you, and you stand in my house counting." My brother-in-law took a step toward me, chest leading the way, and that's when my father stood up. My father, who had not raised his voice indoors in my entire lifetime, said one sentence. "Sit down, Doug." And he sat, the way men like that always sit when a real voice finally shows up in the room. Then my father turned to my mother, quieter now, with a lunchbox kind of tiredness in it. "Lori, it's done." He didn't defend me, let's be fair about that. He just stopped lying, which after 2 years was its own kind of thunder. "Drowning now," my sister spat out the last of it as a weapon. "I told Mom to keep your kid home, he repeats everything he hears." And there it was, in front of every witness in the room, the adults-only rule had exactly one child's name attached to it the whole time. I took out my phone, opened the banking app, and tapped 4 times. Then I turned the screen so the room could see it. Standing transfer canceled. "The support ends tonight," I said. "You told me these kids deserve to be here." "You were right about one thing, Mom. Deserving matters. My son deserves better than a family he has to be smuggled past." I picked up my purse and left the folder right there on the tablecloth, because I had my own copies at home and this family needed theirs. I wished the room a Merry Christmas at ordinary conversational volume. Nobody answered. On my way down the hall, I passed the staircase where my sister's 3 kids sat wide-eyed in their church clothes, and I stopped for half a second, because there are lines even a house fire like this one shouldn't cross. "None of this is your fault, girls," I told them. My niece looked back at me with an expression I recognized instantly, a kid doing math she shouldn't have had to learn yet. I opened the front door and stepped out into the first real snow of the season, the slow, fat, unhurried kind, and heard the noise finally break loose behind me through the glass. My mother's voice climbing, my sister's climbing right over it, my brother-in-law's rumbling underneath both of them, the sound of a kingdom auditing itself in real time. The door opened again before I even reached the car. It was my aunt, carrying my scarf out to me, and she wound it around my neck the way you'd bundle up an 8-year-old. "Your grandmother would have applauded, child," she said, jaw set tight against the cold, and went back inside to watch the rest of the show. I sat in my car for 10 seconds, both hands on the wheel, and let out one long breath, the kind you finally release when the ambulance doors shut behind you. Then I drove the 8 minutes through the falling snow to the orchard. Every window of that farmhouse glowed gold. Through the front glass I could see my son on his grandfather's shoulders in his pajamas, reaching up, being steadied while he set that crooked little gold star, the one that said Grandma L on the back, onto the very top of the Christmas tree. Some houses you knock on. That one was already mine. Here's what January looked like, in plain numbers, since numbers are what started all of this. The transfer still leaves my account on the 1st of every month, $650, same as always. It just changed direction. It goes into my son's college fund now, and the very first time I watched it land there, the knot under my ribs finally came undone and left without leaving a note. My mother called 11 times in the first 2 weeks. The voicemails ran the whole scale from hissing to honey and back to hissing again. The day she got to the part about me destroying her reputation at church, I blocked the number. The committee, for what it's worth, handled things the way small towns always do: no trial, no verdict, just a quiet new name at the top of the spring luncheon list. My sister sent exactly one text: "You've torn this family apart." I read it twice and set the phone down. Torn it apart. I'd only turned the lights on. Whatever fell over was already leaning. From my father came a Christmas card, 10 days late, my name in his cramped handwriting. Inside, wrapped in a paper towel, two $20 bills and one shaky line. I'm sorry, I didn't mail anything back and I didn't call. I tucked it into my husband's box, right next to the card about telling the truth even when your voice shakes, because that drawer is where I keep the men who at least tried. My door isn't locked to my father. It just doesn't open for stories anymore. Truth is the password now, and he knows it. On Christmas morning, while a certain house across town sat quiet under its perfect, untouched tree, my son came down the orchard staircase to cocoa and paper crowns. Hal wore sleigh bells on his boots at 67 years old, and the only party that ever actually mattered had a guest list of exactly 4, and a crooked little gold star presiding over all of it from the very top of the tree. I used to think family meant the people who share your blood. I know better now. Family is the people who make room for your child at their table without ever needing to be paid for it. My son deserves to be somewhere he's wanted, so that's exactly where we live now. That's my story. 24 months of transfers, one folded statement tucked in a junk drawer, and a county stamp nobody in that room could argue with. If this reminded you to verify before you send another dime, even to family, take it as your sign. Check the records. Protect your kids. If someone you love needs to hear this, send it to them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.